What's going on, everybody? I am Ben Wolby.
And I am Alex Caruso, and we are back for the best buy low and sell high players of the week. We got so many players for you guys today. We have some super underrated guys that are not being talked about enough, and we're here to bring all of that fantasy football goodness to you today. So let's start with the buy lows. Ben, who is your first buy low for this week?
I am buying low on Austin Ekeler. I checked four of my leagues. I know that's a small sample size, but Austin Ekeler wasn't on a winning team in any of them. And I know maybe your
Wow.
league mates are better than mine. Alex, I have a couple trade offers here. Can you let me know what you think? James Cook and Puka Nakua for Austin Ekeler. Is that a fair trade?
I think that's a fair trade.
What about Devon Achan and Calvin Ridley for Austin Ekeler?
Oh, I Eckler all day.
Josh Jacobs and Devontae for Austin Ekeler. Sorry, Devontae Smith.
I would take Jacobs and Smith.
But these are all fair trades, right?
Fair trades.
And what I'm saying is I genuinely think Austin Ekeler, like he missed weeks 2 through 5, and since returning, he's the RB 33, averaging 5.4 points per game. The Ekeler manager is sick of him. I think I would prefer Austin Ekeler in all three of those trades that I'd mentioned.
Yeah, I
Uh,
would too.
and, Perfect. And Austin Ekeler, right? He had one reception last week. That's only the second time in his entire career as a starter that he had a healthy game with just one reception. So the Chargers lose to the Chiefs. And what do you think the first conversation Brandon Staley had with Kellen Moore was, Alex?
It's got to be, how do we get the ball to Austin Eckler?
How do we get the ball to Austin Ekeler more? In weeks that he's played this year, he is 50% of the team's rushes and 13% of the team's target share. And that is nearly identical to his 2021 numbers, where he finishes the overall RB2. Target share is a little bit lower than last year, but keep in mind how banged up the wide receiver room was last year. No Mike Williams moving forward this year. And what I'm doing when I'm saying buy low on Austin Ekeler is I'm saying buy low on a dynamic elite player who has been able to thrive on this workload. We know what he's capable of. He's underperforming, but the workload is there. That offense is great. And even if his workload only increases a little bit, doesn't matter. His workload right now is the workload we need him to have, and he will have to be a top running back for the rest of the season.
Completely agree. When you mentioned dynamic elite playmaker, I think of Rashee Rice, who has got to be the most underrated wide receiver in the entire NFL right now, whether he is a rookie or not. Right now, so far, he has been targeted on 33% of his routes. The only players that are higher are Tyreek Hill, Travis Kelce, and Brandon Ayuk, which says to me that there is some super elite efficiency. He just ran the most routes of the season this past week, and I think that workload is going to continue to grow, especially when behind Travis Kelce, there is no true wide receiver one. We've talked about him before in the show. I think that he is still a mega buy low because he hasn't had that true big breakout game, but that window is going to shut very soon. I cannot get enough of Rashee Rice.
Alex, do you call him a mega elite buy low?
Has to be, always.
That offense is too good. I don't know. I mentioned it during the offseason a lot. If you want to win your fantasy football leagues, you've got to find a way to get a Kansas City Chief in your offense. Right now, it's looking like Pacheco and Kelsey were the guys to draft, but Rashee Rice might be coming around as well.
Yeah,
I think,
go ahead.
yeah, if you're looking for another dynamic playmaker at the tight end position who isn't Travis Kelce, I think you need to maybe consider adding Dalton Kincaid. Without Dawson Knox on the field, Kincaid has a 23.3% team target share, and that's a number that ranks only behind Travis Kelce in tight end team target shares. Travis Kelce, for example, his target share is 26%. Kincaid right there, 23% with Knox off the field. And I caught wind of this from my friend Arjun Menon on Twitter. The Buffalo Bills are likely to run fewer plays out of 12 personnel. That's when there are two tight ends on the field. Now that Dawson Knox is on IR, and it's notable because the Bills run the fourth highest rate of 12 personnel. Now, what's really interesting when we take a closer look at this is Josh Allen has been particularly effective in 12 personnel groupings, averaging 1.5 more yards per attempt than when the offense is an 11 grouping. So it's definitely a big concern. And while Kincaid may not be an elite asset moving forward, his target share is still going to increase. And I still think that you can look at him as a potential top half tight end moving forward.
Yeah, I like him a lot. I think that, again, it's one of the things that I'm going to talk about with my next guy. When you think of players that continue to grow over a season for one reason or another, especially when they're younger or they're coming off injuries or they're rookies. I mean, Javonte Williams reminds me just like that right now. We're finally starting to see the turning of the corner midseason, similar to what we're seeing with Dalton Kincaid, because Javonte Williams just saw his first game since week 1 with 19 touches, first game of the season over 50% of the snaps, and the most total yards that he's seen. And from all the injury doctors and people that have talked about the recoveries for these type of injuries, they're saying right around week 7, week 8, week 9 is when we see close to 100% health. So to me, that says that his workload is going to continue to ramp up. And he's one really big game away where he starts finding his way into the end zone from a lot bigger fantasy production. And I think that right now we should be buying him, because right now we will not be able to come fantasy playoffs.
I don't know that I have the same enthusiasm for him as you do. I'm just curious, what do you think his ceiling is in this offense?
I think that he could be a top 15 running back by the end of the year. I mean, he's
So
finished as the running back 32 or better in all but one game this year. Obviously, running back 32 or better, 10 points, probably not going to win you weekly leagues, but he's been consistent. It's just a matter of him seeing a little bit more volume and getting healthier off the ACL.
So when you're saying to buy him, you're saying buy him as if he is a top 15 running back.
Oh, I that's the ceiling. That is the ceiling of where he was. I'd probably be buying him as a borderline top 20 running back. I think more right now where he's going in the late running back 30 ranges, I'd probably be buying him as a top 24 running back right now.
Yeah, I think he has the appeal as like a top 24 back. I think top 15 is pushing it. Totally with you. He could totally take on a much bigger role once he starts having more points in your fantasy football leagues.
I would trade him for actually really quick. I would trade Alexander Madison for him right now. I think that's a really good comparison. Top 24 running back, seeing a lot of volume. I'd trade Alex Madison for him all day and not think twice about it. But who is the next final player that we're going to be talking about as far as buy lows for you?
For me, my last buy low, Chris Godwin. This guy has a ton of upside that just has not yet been realized. He has 33 receptions, right? 0 touchdowns. Here are some players with fewer receptions and more touchdowns. Jordan Addison, 29 receptions and 6 touchdowns. Cortland Sutton, 31 receptions and 5. Gabe Davis, 22 receptions, 4 touchdowns. Chris Godwin has the most receptions with the 0 touchdowns, the fewest number of touchdowns of any wide receiver in the NFL. And to me, that screams buy low. Last week, Chris Godwin totaled only 9.7 fantasy points, while his teammate Mike Evans totaled 17.2. But get this, Chris Godwin had more targets. Since week 4, Godwin has 9 more targets than Evans. And you know from the offseason, if you've been following the show, that I am a Mike Evans hater. And I am wrong about that. Fantasy Receipts, if you're watching this, I was wrong about Mike Evans. He is awesome. But Baker over his career, and part of the reason why I was more interested in Godwin was because of Baker's connection with his slot receivers. The only notable wide receiver of his whole career was really Jarvis Landry out of the slot. So I think we're going to continue to see that happen, where Chris Godwin is going to dominate the targets like he has been. And once those touchdowns come through, Chris Godwin is a week in and week out top 24 wide receiver. And I probably do prefer Evans rest of season because of the connection we've seen between them. I mean, Mike Evans is just awesome. I was wrong about him, but there's nothing wrong with firing up Chris Godwin and buying low. He's just not scoring touchdowns.
But if you want to win a fantasy football championship, like why are we buying the number 2 wide receiver in a Baker Mayfield-led offense? Like you just said yourself, Mike Evans is probably your guy. Baker Mayfield's probably going to be the quarterback for the rest of the year. Like, do you think that getting a wide receiver 2 in an offense like this is where you can win a fantasy football championship?
Yeah, absolutely. Because you're buying low on a player who's should be scoring more fantasy points than he is. I agree. Oh, you're buying the number 2. Are you? Chris Evans has more targets. Godwin. Chris Godwin. We always do that when we talk about this duo. Chris Godwin has more targets than Mike Evans. It's just that Mike Evans is the one scoring the touchdowns. What if there's a 4-week stretch where Godwin is the one scoring the touchdowns? What if defenses adjust and now suddenly Mike Evans is getting doubled and Chris Godwin is able to put up more points because he is seeing those targets? I think this is a really good way to win fantasy football leagues because he is underperforming, but he is still startable and his ceiling is still way higher than he's currently performing.
Completely. I think another player that ceiling is higher than he's even performing potentially could be someone like Josh Downs, who's been really, really good. Maybe the ceiling cannot be higher than him being the wide receiver 13 in Gardner Minshew starts. Like when you get a quarterback that can throw Josh Downs the ball, he has been really, really productive. I mean, in 2 of the last 3 games, he had 97 and 125 receiving yards. And from weeks 9 to 15, which is the next 7 weeks, which does include their bye, he doesn't have a single bad matchup. Every single matchup is neutral or a really good matchup for him. So when you think about a rookie that's getting better, that's been productive with Baker Mayfield, that doesn't have bad matchups, now's the time to be buying him, especially when he's owned in right about 50% of leagues right now. Like, I don't think people realize just how good he's been. And I think there's a real chance that he could be the wide receiver 1 on this team fantasy-wise, because I think Gardner Minshew fits him a little bit more than Michael Pittman.
Yeah, I actually added Josh Downs in my fantasy league this week because I'm a big believer in his. And sticking with this offense, Alex, my first sell high is Michael Pittman. He had 2 catches last week, 2, but he finishes the wide receiver 7. And I think that too many people are viewing him as the wide receiver 1 on this offense. But like you just mentioned, Michael Pittman is not the clear-cut number 1. I'm not really that much sure he's the number 1 wide receiver on this offense moving forward. And let's just stick with that for a second. Pittman does lead the Colts in target share with Minshew as a passer, but it's worth noting Downs only has 4 fewer fantasy points than Pittman, and he has seen his route participation increase each and every week with Gardner Minshew. And when this offense is filled with as many dynamic playmakers as it is, like I mentioned, Pittman 2 catches, but wide receiver 7 because he's a dynamic playmaker. Zach Moss, somehow dynamic playmaker. He's been relevant. Jonathan Taylor still getting up to speed. And Downs has been solid. But what we've seen from Downs, I wouldn't mind selling Pittman for Downs plus. Or if Downs is on your waivers, trading Pittman away for like a tier 3-4 running back and adding Downs because he could have just as much production as Pittman moving forward. And there really is no clear-cut preference. Pittman, like I said, only 2 catches last week.
Yeah, and I think the biggest thing we want is the consistency at the quarterback position. Like Gardner Minshew to me is just like more fun Jared Goff, where like, it's not like a great NFL quarterback that's going to win a lot of games, but great for fantasy where they get their guys the ball and they make their fantasy football offenses very productive. Someone that doesn't have that would be Garrett Wilson. I love Garrett Wilson. Garrett Wilson is seeing volume right now, but my biggest worry is that Zach Wilson is the quarterback. And we have seen flashes and signs, but to me, that is my sign to sell high on Garrett Wilson, because if the fantasy playoffs come, I don't want to be trusting him to win my fantasy football matchup, because all we are is one really bad Zach Wilson game from completely nuking anything that Garrett Wilson is going to do. And for me, when it comes to fantasy playoffs, winning championships, I want guys with quarterbacks and get them the ball. I don't think Zach Wilson's going to do that. So for that reason right now, I would be selling Garrett Wilson high while we still can, because I think the worst is yet to come for Zach Wilson.
Alex, 2-1 odds that Aaron Rodgers takes a snap on a football field by Christmas. 2-1 odds. Do you think there's a shot, or do you think that's like stupid? Waste of money to bet on that.
I don't ever want to doubt anything with these crazy Achilles recoveries right now. We saw it with Cam Akers where it's never been done before. We're seeing these like steps in the Aaron Rodgers recovery that have never been done before. Personally, I'd still be using that narrative to sell because I just don't think it's likely, but nothing would shock me. Like I don't want to be caught with my pants down because, I didn't believe that Aaron Rodgers is going to come back, but like we've never seen it before. It's possible, but I would use that narrative to be selling Garrett Wilson right now for a better price.
I will say this. If Aaron Rodgers is back by Christmas, I am hopping on the subway and I am going to the Camden Aquarium to go to the dolphin exhibit. If you don't know what I'm talking about, Google it. You'll figure it out. Aaron Rodgers has made some interesting claims. Yeah. An interesting claim I'll make is that I think you should be trying to trade away Jahmyr Gibbs right now, and not because I think he's bad. I called Jahmyr Gibbs a buy last week, and I said, if he breaks out, you won't be able to get him for as cheap as he was. And I was right. Now, I don't know that you'll be able to sell him for anything higher than what he's currently worth. He was the RB2 last week. And Alex, I think you'd agree, he's probably one of our favorite running backs the rest of the season, right?
Yeah, definitely one of our favorites, no doubt.
So here's what I would do. I would ask the Montgomery manager, hey, any interest in Gibbs? Because handcuffing isn't as taboo as it used to be. I think that there's room for both of these guys to succeed in this offense. And if the manager is struggling, or if you can use Gibbs to upgrade for Jonathan Taylor, DeAndre Swift, or Kenneth Walker, I love Kenneth Walker the rest of the season. I think that is why I would say trade Jahmyr Gibbs, because Jahmyr Gibbs is good. And I do not want to trade him. I I am not suggesting if you have him on your fantasy teams, find a trade partner. All I'm saying is that if you can find a haul for a round one rookie running back who just had the best game of his career, the best game of his season against what was a very solid Ravens defense, I would.
Yeah, I think that is a completely fair point to make, especially after what he did this week and with David Montgomery coming back, all those things considered. I don't blame you. I want to have more hope, especially when it's someone that you really like, but I just don't think that hope is going to be there as much as we would need it to. Similar to George Pickens, who is a perfect reminder for me that someone that I'm going to lose a little bit of hope on. I'm curious to see your thoughts. My problem is Deontay Johnson's back, been one of the most open guys in the NFL over the last 3 years. Only Stephon Diggs, Devontae Adams have more targets than Deontay Johnson. So him coming back and him having double-digit targets in 12 out of 17 games last year says to me that George Pickens is probably not someone you want to trust. Similar to what we talked about with Godwin, George Pickens is the wide receiver 2 in a Kenny Pickett-led offense. And for me, when it comes to championships and fantasy football, I sound like a broken record. Not the person I want to trust when Deontay is going to be the wide receiver 1 no matter what. But I know you might feel a little differently than I do.
Well, I'm a diehard Steelers fan. Is Deontay the wide receiver no matter what? I know what we've seen
100%.
Historically, right? Is he? Why do you think that?
Well, it's just because he's an elite volume getter. If you look at any metric that charts how well guys get open, if you look at his target rate with a number of different quarterbacks, whether it was Ben Roethlisberger, Mitch Trubisky, Kenny Pickett, Deontay gets targeted by an elite rate by anybody, and all the advanced metrics look for Deontay, especially with the volume that he's getting week over week. And we saw it this week with just how high of a rate that he was targeted at in just his first game back. I mean, that says to me that he is going to be wheels up going forward.
Can you remind me how many touchdowns Deontay Johnson has scored over the past 20 games? More, the past 25 games.
That answer is 0. Touchdowns is the number one thing that is missing from Deontay's game. But again, he set the NFL record last year for most targets without a touchdown by far. He's due for positive regression. It is only a matter of time, especially when he had 44% of the Steelers' end zone targets when he was on the field.
Sure. And I agree with the fact that he is targeted at an elite volume and he's due for a touchdown. He's going to be a positive regression candidate to score a touchdown. But while he's struggled to score touchdowns, how many touchdowns has George Pickens scored this season?
He's had definitely more than Deontay. So that
had 2.
Is all that may matter.
He's had 2. And I believe, don't quote me on this, they might have even been the 2 only passing touchdowns that the Steelers have had this season.
Yeah.
I mean, the way I see it, yeah, Deontay Johnson is probably going to be an elite target earner, but George Pickens is going to be an elite yard getter. Deontay Johnson doesn't have as high of yards per reception as George Pickens, doesn't have that touchdown upside like George Pickens. And even though I prefer Deontay Johnson as the wide receiver 1 on the Pittsburgh Steelers, I'm a Steelers fan and I prefer him, I do think I'd prefer George Pickens moving forward in fantasy.
Yeah, that is completely fair. But someone that I would not be preferring in fantasy over another player in the same backfield would be Chuba Hubbard. I think that Miles Sanders is still the guy. I mean, I was definitely someone that was vouching for Chuba Hubbard, that you should be picking him up, should be on your fantasy teams. But Frank Reich's quotes this week did not make me as optimistic about Chuba Hubbard. I mean, it sounds like that Miles Sanders is still going to be their guy. It sounds like it's still going to be a committee. But I don't think that Chuba Hubbard is going to take over the backfield like some people are thinking right now. And if there are, other fantasy managers in your leagues right now that are saying, okay, I would trade him because I would trade for him because he's a starter. That's where I'd be selling Chuba Hubbard as a top 30 running back right now, because I don't think that he's actually going to be the starter. And I think the extra rest that Sanders got before the bye week will allow him to come back and at least be the running back 1 to some extent, even if a committee.
So stock down on Sanders just because of Hubbard's involvement, but you would say that Sanders is a buy then?
Stock down on both.
Stock down on both, but sell Hubbard, buy Sanders.
Yes.
Yeah, I don't really love this offense. We talked about Adam Thielen the past 2 episodes about how you should just be selling him. And I agree. I think Sanders is probably the only valuable piece of this backfield. But if you can get Hubbard for cheap, I'm unopposed to it.
Yep, completely. But what about you? Is there any other running backs, maybe valued similarly or in any kind of range that you would be liking or not be liking right there?
Yeah, listen, I think it's obvious. We all know that Darrell Henderson right now, you're not going to get worthwhile returns selling him. We all kind of know what he is and who he's capable of. But like his role and what he carved out last week, he's just not built to last. He went from like straight off the couch, right? But he saw 18 rushes, 3.4 yards per carry against the team that had been allowing the sixth most yards per carry, 4.8, right? The Pittsburgh Steelers. And Zach Evans did not record a single snap. Myles Gaskin, he was a healthy scratch getting acclimated. And the only reason that Henderson got the nod was, quote unquote, from Sean McVay, his familiarity with the offense, right? That's not really a screaming endorsement of a running back moving forward. And what happens when Kyren Williams returns from IR, right? Like, what happens then? If you can package Henderson to an RB needy team, I recognize you will not get a haul for him. But if you can throw him in as a bonus, something to sweeten the pot, he's not a league winner. You're not playing to win number 6, number 5, number 4. You are playing to win number 1. And Henderson is not going to be the guy to take you to number 1. Might win you a week like he did last week, might win you another week, but he's not going to take you anywhere in the fantasy football playoffs.
Would you be taking Chuba Hubbard right now? If I said I'll give you Darrell Henderson for Chuba Hubbard, would you take that deal?
No, because I think Darrell Henderson is, like I said, he could win you one more week. I don't think you're getting that from Hubbard. Okay. I would prefer Henderson over Hubbard. But okay. I would also still say that's why you should be trying to sell Henderson, because of that thought process. Well, he might win you a week. But what if you package him with, let's say we're talking about selling Michael Pittman, right? Like package the two of them together. You could probably get an upgrade at the running back position, maybe get an upgrade at the wide receiver position.
What about someone like Bijan right now? We talked about just headaches in these running back backfields. We talked about it with the Panthers. We talked about the Rams. They're just headaches of what's going to happen in this backfield the next couple of weeks. Bijan follows that both literally and figuratively with that whole headache conundrum last week. We've talked about it. We don't need to talk about how annoyed we are with Arthur Smith. But as far as next week, is there any concern? Would you be selling Bijan Robinson? Would you be maybe buying low after we saw last week? Like, where do you stand in this whole situation?
I mean, if you want to call him a buy low, he is, right? Because his value is certainly higher than what he's being valued at now. But by what? By a hair? By the tiniest molecule? Like, it's Bijan Robinson. If somebody in your league is willing to trade away Bijan Robinson, pounce, right? If I had him, I would not be trading him away.
Yeah, I think the only things are only going to get better for him, especially when the receiving usage that he's seen. But he also has the second most carries in the league right now without a rushing touchdown. Him and Alexander Mattison are far and away above any other running back. I think that he's due for some scores. It is only a matter of time for Bijan. But again, I wouldn't be worried. If you can buy him, I'd be buying him. If you can't, no worries. But again, hold him at absolute worst. But that is it for our buy low and sell high players for today. We are back every single Wednesday at 1 p.m. Eastern time live, giving you all the fantasy football goodness that you can ask for. But until next time, don't forget to like, subscribe, turn the bell notifications on for more 33rd team goodness coming each and every single day.